Hey, so we are live. Very nice. I'm here with Etienne Charles, magnificently talented trumpeter, composer, percussionist. Etienne, for those of you who may have already had the pleasure of hearing this gentleman, is a native of Trinidad and now living in the United States. And I think here in Jazz Aspen, I believe that we had the first time Etienne came here, and Etienne, you'll have to help me remember. I remember you came with your great band Creole Soul after that recording. I think that was about 3 or 4 years ago, but I don't remember had you been before then. And I think you have, but and forgive me because there's a lot of wonderful people that come through. I can't always remember when the first time was. So tell me
Hey,
that before we jump into your life and music.
hey, Jim. Yeah, thank you for having me. It's always good to be connected to the Jazz Aspen family. Believe it or not, the first time I played Jazz Aspen was with Renee Marie in 2014.
That's it. There's a great
Little
picture.
Nell,
Now
yeah.
I remember.
Yeah.
Yes, yes.
It was one of the first years of Ideas Fest, I think.
Okay,
Maybe not one of the first years, but the first time I had heard about it, and
sure.
it was in the thick of it while when we played at the Lonello. I think it was June 2014, and
Yeah.
my first time at Aspen, and yeah, it was mind blowing. And then we came back with Creole Soul, I think in 2016,
Yeah.
and then again in June of 2020 for the
Okay.
summer
Yeah.
jazz experience.
Yes. Yes.
I remember
Yes.
because it snowed a little bit this
No,
last
don't
time we did
remind me. Oh my gosh,
it in June.
that was crazy. But it's funny you say it snowed. I'm looking outside, sitting here. It's snowing right now. I'm in Colorado, and it can be. But so well. Listen. Okay, now you remember. And there's a beautiful picture in our book. We did a book for our first 25th year book. And there's a great, I remember as soon as you said Renee Marie, there is a picture in the book where you are playing the trumpet and Renee Marie is holding the microphone down. She's obviously finished singing and it's your turn. And she is just looking at you with this just, I can't even describe it, such combination of love and admiration and like surprise and delight. It's a beautiful moment. And as soon as you said it, I said, oh yeah, I remember I was right there when that happened. Well, listen, let's roll back a little bit, okay? Because I know I'm interested, and I'm sure anyone who's taken the time to jump on today to this listen up with you would like to know about your roots because you are a man from Trinidad, what's known as the Eastern Caribbean. And it's a part of the world not far from where I grew up, which was Miami. And I had a very, very interesting experience as a kid growing up. I was born in the 1950s and grew up kind of in the 60s. And Florida and South Florida was a very, very, very much a melting pot of that part of the world. And I feel like in hindsight, I was very lucky. I got exposed to a lot of different cultures, a lot, and many Caribbean, of course, Cuban, and but not just Cuban, other Latin cultures. But the Caribbean is a very special place. So I'd like to hear from you about how you made that journey from Trinidad to the United States and the music and what started and how you made this. Just give us the start of that journey. I'd love to hear.
Well, I mean, yeah, I was born and raised in Trinidad at a time when, it was a time before like cable TV, right?
Okay.
So it was a time when we had a lot of our own culture in our face all the time.
Hmm.
And so I my father and uncle and brother played in a steel band, face to band group. So I was exposed to steel band from a very early age. I was exposed to Jose, which is a Muslim drumming ritual that happens in September in Trinidad. I was exposed to African folk drumming because my sister was a dancer, and so in all of her concerts they would have the folk drum, and I sang in a choir in elementary school, primary school, Bishop Anstey Junior School. So from an early age there was a lot of actual like indigenous Trinidad folk.
Hmm.
Um, culture being put in my head, put in my heart, put in my sound before I even knew that I was going to be a trumpet player or composer or musician. And so, um, and yeah, throughout my career, my life has just been constantly drawing from all of those different things. I got to Florida in 2002. I went to Florida State University for my bachelor's degree, and at the time it was really interesting because Marcus Roberts had just started teaching there, like my sophomore year. He was brought in as a house rap music scholar, and by the time I was getting ready to graduate, we had developed a really strong bond. Master apprentice, mentor mentee, and we were getting ready to record my first album, Culture Shock. And I wrote a calypso for the album. Basically, Culture Shock started as a composition project for a direct independent study I was doing with Marcus Roberts, and he was like, "I want you to write a suite of music." And so I decided to draw on the immigrant experience in the United States, but not just that, but a Black Caribbean immigrant experience in the deep South of the United States, because Florida is a huge state, and Miami is
Yes.
another country.
Nothing to do with
Nothing like
Florida State.
Tallahassee. It's nothing like the Panhandle. It's nothing like
Nothing.
Miami is its own thing, right?
Its own
Um,
country.
and so yeah, you need a passport to go from Miami to Tallahassee, And so I had a calypso on there, old school, and I was showing the musicians on the album who were my professors: Rodney Jordan, Leon Anderson, Marcus Roberts. So I had my quattro, I was strumming, and and at the end of it, I'm funny because I have it recorded. I have that rehearsal recorded, and I listen back to it every now and then. And he said, "Yeah, you see what you just did there? That's what you were supposed to be doing. This is you. Like
Hmm.
you need to introduce all of us to what the music of Trinidad is about from your perspective." And so that's basically what I've been doing, and it's expanded, to include the whole Caribbean: Haiti, Guadeloupe, Jamaica, Martinique. I could go down the list: the Dutch Caribbean, the French Caribbean, Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic. I channel it all because that's what the Caribbean is. It's kind of like Miami in a sense, but it's a melting pot, and the Caribbean is a bigger melting pot. And it's been a fun journey thus far, and I'm grateful to be able to have had the opportunity to meet so many great musicians from my homeland and from all over the Caribbean, and people like Monty Alexander, who's been a mentor and friend for many years. I connected with Chucho Valdez a couple years ago, and we've had a great connection since then. And I could go down a list of all these Caribbean icons that I've been lucky enough to connect with, and then all of
So
these
who
great
else?
musicians.
Name some other of your
People
Caribbean heroes.
people like Redman Watson and Lionel Sooner, who are some great folk drummers in Trinidad. Ella Andal, who's a great calypsonian, and Orisha singer. People like Desi Jones, who's a legendary drummer in Jamaica. Arturo Tappan, who's a legendary saxophonist from Barbados. So many of them. There's a young percussionist named Vernon Chatelain from Curacao, who's
Mm.
really tearing it up as a music. Another guy, Randall Corsin from Curacao, Jacques Schwartzbart from Guadeloupe, and then a plethora of musicians from Haiti: Jean-Ben, Thomas,
Wow.
Chogo Chioda, musicians in Brazil. I go down, and these are all names that people may or may not know, depending on
And
on
I
their
didn't know
exposure.
too. Yeah,
And,
I
and but these are all people that have really channeled their culture into their music. People like um from St. Lucia, people like Boo Hinkson, and all these great music, and the Garifuna, the Druma Euroman, a great drumming group from Belize, that do the Garifuna music. So it's all of these, and it's almost like we have our own world.
do. Yeah, I was so speaking of your own world, going back years ago, I mean way back, and you'll know exactly when the famous jazz pianist Jelly Roll Morton was one of the first cats who really dug into the Caribbean and those sounds and started to really bring it. And he used to call it that Spanish tinge, but it's more than that. And it's interesting when you talk about all of the influences of Dutch and French. And I guess this is because all of these countries sent people on boats to the Caribbean at some point, But I'd love to hear, because you just rattled off 50 names of musicians across all these different things. So Latin is a big part of it, but it's not just Latin.
Yeah, you know, it's so interesting that you mentioned Jelly Roll Morton because most people don't know that Jelly Roll Morton was Haitian. His
Haitian.
yeah, his
I
name was
didn't know that.
his real
Wait,
name was Ferdinand Lamotte. And
whoa.
and he was part of a really famous musical family in Haiti called the Lamotte family.
Oh,
Actually, his cousin Ludovic Lamotte is probably the most famous, one of the most famous contemporary classical composers from Haiti. He was
wow.
well documented as a composer, and so he naturally always brought that quote unquote Spanish tinge. You know, he said, like you said, jazz is not jazz without that Spanish, and that Spanish tinge is that Caribbean lilt. You know,
Mhm.
they refer to it as the Spanish tinge probably because of the the connection to the Mexican cavalry band that stayed in New Orleans after the World Fair. Um, but you know, there's so much of a French, like for me, the French Caribbean influence is so much stronger. And when you listen to those recordings, like who was in New Orleans at that time? You know, I mean, slavery
When
was
you
a
say that time, when do you mean
I'm
exactly?
talking about the late 19th century into early 20th
Okay,
century.
so you mean like
Um,
the 1800s,
yeah, late,
early
yeah, because
1900s?
specifically, um, the Emancipation Proclamation in the United States happened in what 1863, 1865, somewhere around there.
Uh-huh.
1863, and then Juneteenth happened in 1865.
Mm.
But blacks were free in the Caribbean as early as the late 18th century because
Wow.
the French abolished slavery around what 1791, somewhere like that.
Mm.
So you have all these free blacks from the Caribbean roaming, looking for work, trying one. And when the shipping business started, most of the people that worked the ships were free blacks from the Caribbean.
Wow.
And so I just found out about a Caribbean population in South Africa, where most of the people were from Barbados, and they've been there since the 1800s. And so it's the same thing with New Orleans. New Orleans is clearly the Caribbean. Like New Orleans is the top of the Caribbean. Anybody from New Orleans will tell you
Yes.
it's like Miami. It's like another country.
Yes.
And the names that you see in New Orleans, you see those names in Haiti, Guadeloupe, and Martinique exclusively.
And is that where Jelly Roll Morton emigrated to from Haiti?
Well,
Was
he
he?
was Haitian American, so I'm pretty sure he was born in the U.S.,
Oh, okay.
but he was Haitian American.
Okay.
And so the history is there, like names like Sincere, who was in Louis Armstrong's Hot Five, Hot Sevens. You only see Sincere in Haiti. That name you see it in Haiti, Guadeloupe, Martinique, New Orleans, Trinidad.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm doing a lot of research actually on this. It's interesting that you would bring that up because it's just like I just started rattling off because I'm doing a whole bunch of homework on it. I'm actually going to go down to New Orleans and dig into the archives about it.
Yeah, that
Mhm.
sounds great, man. You got me fired up for that music with heat and rhythm,
Oh,
especially
yeah.
because it's a long winter up here in the mountains.
Yep. And
Telling
that's
you what, I'm not complaining, but I'm just saying, that all that the way you talking and moving your shoulders, and I can feel the hips and the rhythm. I can smell it. So let's go back. I was, yeah, and you're talking about what you're working on. So I was reading that you got a new album that's in the can, or maybe it's come out. Carnival: The Sound of the People, Volume One.
well, volume one is just about out. Volume one is out. Volume two is in the can, waiting to come out.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
volume two is coming
So
out.
let's talk about Carnival. One of my favorites. I saw a picture on your website. It looked like you were it looked like a street in New Orleans that was just packed with people, and you guys were up on the second floor, like hanging out. It looked like Carnival.
It was Carnival, and
Where was
it
that
was
take?
in Trinidad. It was in
Oh
Trinidad,
man.
and
When
so
it and Trinidad, help our dear listeners out there. Carnival, the actual date is in February, is it not?
yeah, it moves around depending. It's based on Mardi Gras, so it's
Okay,
whenever. So it's kind of like when Mardi Gras is, we have Carnival in Trinidad. So it moves around with the Catholic Lenten calendar.
got it.
So I'm not sure exactly when the next one is, but it normally falls around middle to late February.
Well,
Sometimes sometimes it's in early March, but most of the time it's in February. And
okay.
so I had a research project a few years ago, the Guggenheim Fellowship. My research project was to research kind of the parts of Carnival that had seemed to be falling out of the mainstream scope. Specifically practitioners like the Jab Malasi, the Lorraine, a lot of the old traditions that tied back to the earliest parts of carnival post emancipation in Trinidad.
And where are you
In
talking?
Trinidad,
In Trinidad.
in
Okay.
Trinidad, and so I went to Trinidad. I bought out some teaching time from MSU and went down to Trinidad and spent I think somewhere between 8 and 11 weeks. So leading up to the carnival season and then during the carnival season, so I could be with all of the different practitioners. I recorded them, I interviewed them, and some of those recording sessions became parts of the album. And so the album features I think maybe 40 something, maybe 50 musicians from Trinidad and plus my band in New York. So it's like the Jab Malasi, which are these
Mhm.
they call jabs, which is Creole for devil, and they cover themselves in blue, shiny blue paint, like
Ooh.
really blinding blue paint.
On their body, like they paint
Cover
their
their
body.
whole body. They basically wear shorts, no shirt, and some sneakers, and they
Wow.
cover their body in this blue paint. Some of them put like a red dye on their lips, and
Wow.
they put aloes in their mouth, like green dyed
Whoa.
aloes to make it look like bile or vomit, and they breathe fire.
Whoa.
They breathe fire, and it's really incredible to see. And so I went up there, and there's a rhythm that goes with what they do. There's a whole rhythm that goes with what they do. And so I when I recorded them playing that rhythm and singing. And then I wrote a piece of music to go with it. And so then I used them. They were on the track, and then I took the track to New York. And Obed and I think Ben is on that track, James Francis, Brian Hogan's, Alex Wins, and we locked into what they were playing. And so I was able to fashion a whole album based on really the sound of the people, the sound, like what our sound is specifically to do with Carnival. Because just like New Orleans, Carnival is a actual microscope into our history from a cultural perspective and from an artistic perspective. These these characters, these portrayers, these songs, these lyrics, they tell the story of our history. And they
Mm.
tell the darkest parts of our history with humor and with beauty in a way that makes sure you know what happened, but make sure also that you're not remembering what happened with a completely sad, dark feeling. It has you more in a wow, okay. And then when you go home and you think it's like, wow, Jab Malasi really replicates what slavery was about.
Mm.
Wow. But when you were in the moment, you're just like, these fellas spitting fire. And so I had a blast doing that project. And volume 2, we recorded as well. And so because it was so much music, so I had to break it up into 2 albums because it was like literally like too much.
I want to hear that. I want to hear that.
I'll send it for you. Yeah, I'll send it for you. I think because I know how you like to dance, and I know how you love being from Miami. I know you love the calypso feel,
I
and
do.
it's full of that, and it's all of the sounds that influence calypso as well.
Oh man, that sounds great. Well, I the closest that I've come to carnival is and I wasn't there for it, but I got the vibe. I went to Brazil a night in the mid 1980s, and I was lucky. I traveled there with a man who was a very, very, very knowledgeable musician about Brazilian music. He's now deceased. He used to live in South Florida. Eddie Higgins was his name. He was a
Mm.
great jazz pianist, and Eddie knew Brazilian music before most cats in America, even in jazz. Really, he was just into it, and he knew a lot of the people, and he traveled there a lot. And I got to know him at a certain time in my life and career, and then we just were talking about it. And he said, I was thinking about going to Brazil, and I was like, oh, when? And he said, well, maybe in the spring. And I said, oh, can I tag along? Yeah. So I got a real immersion. I had 16 days in Rio in
Woo.
May of 1985, and all I remember is that there was not one single night, not one, when the music that we were listening to the last thing that we listened to wasn't sometime around the sun was coming up. That's how much music we went all night, every night, and there was still some place to go. It didn't stop. I was stumbling by the time, but I never saw music. I never saw people so deeply into music as what I saw at that time in Brazil, in the clubs, just the passion and the talent and the rhythm and everything overwhelming. And I've always dreamed to go to the real carnival. I mean, actual carnival time.
Yeah.
But I've heard Trinidad's carnival, by the way, is right there. Maybe some will say no, Trinidad's the best carnival in the world if you want to see the real. And Rio's got too crazy and too big and commercial. If you want to really see the real carnival, go to Trinidad. So,
Yeah, it's interesting because Brazil. I've been to Brazil. I've been to Salvador in Bahia, and I've been to Recife, which is in Pernambuco state, and those were the two main ports where where African captives came in.
slaves came
And
to,
when I was there, I felt like I was in Trinidad.
yeah, I
It was
bet.
the craziest thing. I was like, especially when I was in Bahia, Salvador de Bahia, I was just like,
Yeah, that's
and you see people on the street, it's like, wait, and it's something about the connection in the diaspora. And Brazil, Trinidad, New Orleans, our carnivals are so similar, even though they're so different.
yeah.
But to me, the main difference is like the language, but the energy, the vibe,
The
and the
rhythm.
message are really simple. It's really a celebration of freedom. And I'm always tied to Trinidad's carnival but one day I really do hope
Mm.
that I'll get to see, specifically I want to see Salvador's carnival. We did a little for the Colbert Show on CBS. Right around Carnival this year, we did a collaboration between the New Orleans Rhythm Kings, Shannon Powell, Hurlin Riley, and a group of Brazilian musicians, Quarteto, one of the famous quartets from Bahia, and I put together a group from Trinidad, and so we basically did like a journey. We did a journey through the carnival. So they started in New Orleans, and then they flew south to Trinidad. They played Liza Jane, and we flew to Trinidad, and we did Savannah Grass, and then we flew to Brazil, and they played played a famous Brazilian tune, and then we all played together and did this
Wow,
like mixed up version of When the Saints, which is like a New Orleans calypso samba, all in 3.5 minutes.
that sounds great. Let's let's do that in Aspen one day. That sounds good.
Let's do it.
All right, I want to change it up here. I want to switch a little bit. So your roots, obviously, and the roots and the rhythm, as Monty would say, very
Mm.
much in the Caribbean. But somewhere along the way, you got the jazz bug, and you and I will say relates a little bit to Monty Alexander, a person whose roots are in Caribbean rhythms, but has developed an affection for and a talent for finding where jazz and Caribbean music can actually meet. And so, and you've played with a lot of great jazz people, Roberta Flack, Marcus Roberts, Count Basie, Monty, Alexander, and you've written a lot. So let's talk a little bit about how that happened in your journey and when and where you started to feel, okay, I've got this Caribbean thing in my bones and in my blood, but now there's something else that I smell here, and I'm going to try to find like a chef that
Mm.
went to the kitchen and threw some things in that big pot.
Great question. I started listening to jazz, as people call it. I was in college, I would say, when I started seriously listening to it. But there had always been a culture of playing songs from the American Songbook, Great American Songbook. There was always a culture of that in Trinidad from long before I was born, because the first radio station in Trinidad was put into place by the US soldiers when they were based in Trinidad during World War II. So the first things that Trinidadians heard on the radio with Glenn Miller, Tommy Dorsey,
Oh,
Duke Ellington, Count Basie. Later, I mean, Dave Brubeck was hugely popular in Trinidad as well. You go down to like many jazz greats were popular among Trinidadian musicians because that's what they heard on the radio. And so there was always a culture. So when you listen, and the same thing with the exchange that happened in jazz, because in the 50s, 40s, and 50s, you start hearing these calypso rhythms and these mambo rhythms start showing up in bebop. And all the big bands start playing calypsos. So it was a natural exchange that happened, probably due to migration, but also with the radio waves and recording technology. So for me, it had already been in my ears because there was a lot of it in the early calypso recordings. They would use like big band style arranging to do the introductions and to do the orchestrations for these great calypsos in the 50s and 60s. And so, but when I started listening to jazz, I always remember the album that hooked me through and through. The first album I really listened to was Sidewinder by Lee Morgan. But the album that hooked me was Blue Train by John Coltrane.
oh, really?
And it was Lee Morgan, 19-year-old Lee Morgan's trumpet playing on it that really, I remember I was doing it was like work study time I remember it was a Saturday morning and I was doing work study time for minimum wage. Back then it was $5.25 in the state of Florida. And I was guarding this door during an audition cycle or something. And I was listening. I had my Discman and I had my CD from the library, Blue Train, a Blue Note record. I still see the CD. And track one is Blue Train. And Lee Morgan took the second solo. And when he went into that double time, I was just like, whoa, okay. And then I just kept rewinding. And I learned that solo. And that's really when I got hooked. And a friend of mine, Nick Rosen, also from Miami, piano player, he was like, well, if you really like that, you should listen to this. And he gave me Blues in the Abstract Truth by Oliver Nelson.
Oh.
That introduced me to Freddie Hubbard. And that introduced me to Eric Dolphy. That introduced me to Roy Haynes. That introduced me to Bill Evans. That introduced me to Paul Chambers. I had like such a great band. And then, with records, it's really once you get hooked on one, it's a Pandora's box because you look up each musician. And so the library at Florida State, you punch in the name of a musician and every single album they played on come. So I punch in Lee Morgan and it's like, ooh, all the Blakey stuff. So I started listening to Blakey. You punch in Bill Evans and all the stuff, his trio, the stuff he did with Miles, and then his record Interplay with Freddie Hubbard. You punch in Freddie Hubbard. So then it's like you basically stuck. And I basically was living, eating, and sleeping the music. I would leave the record player on while I slept, and I really got hooked. And then I had a Monty Alexander album from when I was a guy named Lester Monta gave me a Monty Alexander record.
Which album? I know Monty's albums because I
Album
know
called Yard Movement. I think it was recorded live at Montreux Jazz Festival.
Oh yeah,
Yard Movement. They play a song by my mentor from Trinidad, Len Bugsy Sharp, on their song called Crying. Yeah. And so I went back to listen to that record. I was like, wow, it's like he's playing reggae, he's playing Naya Bingy, but he's bopping.
Yeah.
And then, but what the album that really showed me that like the Caribbean vibe really is in jazz already is I was listening to David Sanchez's album Melaza. It's David Sanchez, Miguel Zenon, Edsel Gomez, Hans Glavischnig, and Antonio Sanchez, and Pernell Santorino is playing percussion. And that album was like kind of triggered my composer gene. And I was like, wow, like you can write music in this style and channel the rhythms of the Caribbean in a new way and not really sacrifice anything in the quote unquote jazz realm and not sacrifice anything in the quote unquote Caribbean realm and kind of come up with this, as you say, chef new fusion. And that's really kind of like that kind of gave me focus. I mean, I still always listen because I'm a big band arranger and I do a lot of composition. So people like Duke Pearson and Horace Silver, I'm a big fan of Horace Silver and Wayne Shorter and Thelonious Monk. I could go down the list of all these, Herbie Hancock and Cannonball Adderley and Nat Adderley and all these great albums. But I really started channeling the Caribbean energy and composing in that vein. And I still write straight ahead projects and do a lot straight ahead projects more with my big band or with a quartet I'm getting ready to put out. But But for me, that like those sounds, Basie, Horace Silver, like Horace Silver was already channeling the Caribbean. For me, Chick Corea's first tune, Chick's tune, the first tune he recorded on Blue Note, which was on a Blue Mitchell record, The Thing to Do. The last track on it is Chick's tune, which is a contrafact on You Stepped Out of a Dream. And they're playing a calypso behind him.
Mhm.
And so it was clear that there was already this, because Blue Mitchell was Bahamian American. So there was clearly there was this exploration happening. Sonny Rollins was doing it. Randy Weston was doing it. Winter Kelly did it a little bit because he was Jamaican American. Oscar Peterson was also West. Then I started realizing that so many of these great musicians were West Indian Americans. Roy Haynes, Oscar Peterson, Winter Kelly, Dizzy Reese, Blue Mitchell. These are not small names in the industry. I've met Abdul Malik, Denzel Best. And so I was like, wow, so we've been in this for a long time. And then of the new flocks, like people like Greg Hutchinson and Ron Blake. So it really just like created this, again, a whole new world, as I said.
Wow. Wow. So we got a few more minutes before we open up for our artist happy hour and some people who are going to have some of their own questions for you. I got one more kind of question for you, and I'll let you just riff on this like a good jazz musician that you are. So JAS, Jazz Aspen Snowmass, is now working with the Frost School of Music, University of Miami, under Shelley Berg, the great dean and jazz pianist. And we understand that you're joining their faculty, which is very cool. And then you're going to be coming out this summer and joining us here for the Jazz Academy for a new thing that we're doing. You've been here when we've had the big band, and I know you dig that, which Christian McBride directs. But this year we're adding a small combo session. So we're actually, the people that are coming are auditioning as groups, we're going to have 5 different groups. It should be quite interesting. And I know you'll be it's great when you can have an artist come who can play and communicate with audiences, but also has a ability to communicate as an educator. So passing on is such an important part of the tradition of the music. So I'd like to just ask you, what are you looking forward to in the next 5 to 10 years of your musical performing, education, everything? Just what are you looking forward to?
Wow. It's
And you have 5 minutes, not 5 hours.
5 minutes. Okay. So 5 years and 5 to 10 years and 5 minutes, I'm really excited to be joining the faculty of Frost School of Music. I've known about Shelley Berg from his days at University of Southern California.
Right.
And I've been a big fan of that faculty, and believe it or not, that student body for many years. And I've been I first heard about Jazz Aspen when I was at Juilliard. Some of my friends and colleagues were coming out to Aspen to do the Jazz Aspen summer.
Yeah, some of the early ones, yeah.
Around the mid 2000s, 2006, 7, 8, around then. And so I had already known. And so like getting to put those two together is going to be fun, especially working with small groups, because I'm a small group band leader. And I'm lucky enough to be able to have taken my band on significant tours. And so being able to pull from that experience and working with the faculty to try to hone these students and these young bands and put them in I see it almost like an incubator where we can get them kind of road ready in a sense, get them ready to be on stages where they are playing major festivals, playing smaller venues, larger venues, jazz clubs, etc. And so that's going to be fun. As also, I'm looking forward to getting an extended period of time in Aspen, because I've heard of the trails up there, and I'm a big outdoors nut now, and so I'm looking forward to that. But in the next 5 years, 5 to 10 years, I really just want to continue to grow as a person and continue to grow as a musician and a band leader and as a teacher. Just continue, like I basically just want to enhance what I do as a band leader, as a composer. I have ideas to start writing. Okay, I've started with during lockdown. I started writing orchestral works. So I'm probably gonna try to do an album of music for orchestra and trumpet. And I've started to do a couple of film scoring projects that are getting off the ground. So I just want to continue to grow. I just want to continue to play and continue to reach people with the music. Live music is very important to me,
Mm.
as it is to you. Like the energy of when a beat makes someone move their feet and shake their hips. Like for me, that's one of the most powerful things. Art is the highest form of communication. And when you make a sound and it makes somebody shake, for me, I'm so addicted to that and replicating that and enhancing it. I just want to channel that as much as possible and create as many live situations when we're able to gather again. And that's really what energizes me is the live energy of seeing people really get healed by music.
Yeah. Well, you say something very powerful. We're talking about live, and this has been obviously the last year, which seems like 10 years of this COVID experience. It has really I don't know anybody who hasn't been really transformed by it, and the way they look at so many human experiences has been altered. And but in music, it's very interesting because what we've experienced is that because we're not able we have not been able to get together in all the live settings that we were taking for granted for the last every day we ever had on earth until a year ago. Now something interesting. Here, you and I are doing something that we never really talked about doing and didn't do a whole lot of previously. It was getting on this video audio format called Zoom, which has which is like a verb now that's part of people's lives and this way of encountering people and having exchanges. And it's interesting. Some of it has been positive. It's